Market Journal, television for agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.
Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine.
Today on Market Journal, goodbye NAFTA, there's a new deal in town. We'll break it down, check on harvest numbers and more with our market analyst. Plus, some cornfields took a beating because of severe weather, but it may not be as bad as you think. We'll tell you how you can still make use of hail-damaged corn. And meet a bug that's driving wheat farmers bonkers. Hear what it is and what researchers are doing to try and exterminate the problem. Market Journal starts right now. Hey everybody, I'm Troy Moling. Thanks for joining us today on Market Journal. We're starting off October with a big show, and it's been a busy news week, but we're here to break it all down for you over the next 30 minutes. Now, September closed out by ushering in a new agreement with our neighbors to the north. Canada will also join Mexico in the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, or USMCA. Now, this new deal will replace NAFTA, which of course is the pact that helps facilitate trade among the three countries, and that's been in effect since 1994. This new agreement won't go into effect until 2020, but aims to open up the Canadian market to U.S. dairy farmers, boost North American car manufacturing, improve labor regulations, and more. Our market analyst is here to help us make sense of the deal. Jeff Peterson is the president of Heartland Farm Partners and has about 20 years of experience in the grain industry. I sat down with him to get his thoughts on the deal and more. What were your initial thoughts when you heard Canada was going to be a part of the deal that's going to replace NAFTA?
You know, I was really relieved. It was nice to have a trade deal behind us. I think with Mexico and also with Canada, two of our big trading partners, I didn't really ever have any doubt that we wouldn't get the deal done, but it's nice to have a completed deal behind us.
And some folks are saying that the USMCA is just NAFTA, but with a new name. NAFTA rebranded, if you will. Do you agree with that? What are some of the new parts of this deal?
Well, there's a couple things in there that I think that stand out to us. I mean, on the ag side, probably just one predominant one, and that's over on the dairy side. You know, the Class 7 milk issue, that was a big deal, and for Canada to go ahead and step away from that. And actually the other win I think we have, Troy, is that we actually end up having probably greater penetration into their market than we would have got through the TPP. And I think that's a big win because I think a lot of people were concerned that we stepped away from TPP and we weren't going to get those same type of concessions in the USMCA. So I think that was good to see.
And let's talk about the Farm Bill for a second. The deadline on that, it's come and gone. So how concerning is that to you? Well,
it's not real concerning to me. I mean, what I think is, and what we're kind of building into our thoughts on the markets is that we're going to get a one-year extension at some point. I think they'll build into it. Now, what's the worst thing that could happen? And I don't think this will be the case, but it could revert back to the 1949 Agricultural Act. But I don't think we'll see that. But overall, for us, it's not going to have too much impact.
Any programs you think that could suffer as a result of the delay on the Farm Bill?
Yeah, there's a little bit that they talk about the land stewardship programs are a little bit in question. Any of the programs that relate to kind of developing trade and building trade, and even some of the food aid programs look like they could get hurt. But the two big ones as part of this, the SNAP and the crop insurance, you know, it looks like they'll continue forward without any hiccups, so that's a good thing.
So what do you think it is going to take to get the Farm Bill passed?
You know, we're going to have to go ahead and actually have some good old negotiating, and we're going to have statesmen who can actually come together, because really the big hang-up that we end up having right now gets back to how do we handle the work requirement as it relates to SNAP. So I think it's going to take both sides just coming together and realizing, you know what, we just need to do what's benefit of both sides here as opposed to either single party.
All right, let's talk for a sec about the USDA quarterly grain report. How would you compare the findings that we're seeing now to the past year?
Well, I think the thing that came from there, it was disappointing because we ended up seeing bigger stocks ultimately come in the corn and bean side ultimately. But I think the thing that was positive though is that 153 million less stocks of corn. That's a good thing. That go ahead and gives us a chance for some better prices down the road. We did see about 136 million more bushels of soybeans, which was a negative. So it kind of gave something, whether you're a bull or a bear in that situation. As we dig a little bit deeper in the numbers, though, that's where it gets a little bit interesting. As you take a look at the Nebraska numbers, for instance, and we like to look at that to give us an idea of what's the amount of bushels that we have to go ahead and deal with at harvest time. 47.8 million less acres or bushels of corn. That's a good thing for Nebraska. However, we're going to have 17.8 million more bushels of soybeans. But you bring those two together, and that means we're almost going to have 30 million less bushels. So that means more space for this harvest to go into. One additional thing that we do like to do, though, Troy, is we like to look at how does the pile at harvest time from 2018 compare to 2017. So we take the stocks, we add in the production, and what it looks like this year compared to last year, going to be about 150 million more bushels, 6.5%. That'd be a big problem if harvest wasn't kind of grinding along slow.
All right, Jeff, let me get your overall reactions on the latest weekly crop progress report. You think weather is going to have any impact on harvest?
Yeah, I do. That's a big concern of ours. I mean, harvest is moving along rather slowly. Nationally, we're about 26% harvested. That compares to about 16% last year and 17% on the 5-year average. We're sitting about 23% harvested on the soybeans. In the past, last year was kind of slow. It was only 14% complete this time of year. The 5-year average is 20. We think a couple weeks down the road from here, though, we think we're going to really slow up here. We think we actually could get on the bean side all the way back to where it could be the second slowest over the last 10 years. Only year that would be slower would be 2009. That's mainly because of the heavy rains that are forecasted over the next 2 weeks.
Yeah, and you were talking about soybeans, still kind of touch and go as far as the soybeans go. You think we're going to see less soybean acreage next year because of all the uncertainty in that market, along with the stockpiles of soybeans that we currently have?
Yeah, I think we are, and there's already a lot of talk about that there's going to be less bean acres. Now, one thing that we're going to have to think about that might make a little bit of a change on that, the farmer might be delaying that decision a little bit longer than what he normally does. And the reason I bring that up is that he may not get a chance this fall to do as much field work as what he normally does. May not get a chance to put on quite as much fertilizer as what he normally does. But our estimations would be we could see 6 to 7 million less acres on the soybean side than what we had this past year. So definitely going to have to make some adjustments.
And what do you think if a farmer still has unsold corn or soybeans at this point? What should they do?
Yeah, at this point, if there are bushels that are going to have to go into town, our first recommendation is if the storage is, say, less than 6 cents per bushels per month or less than 18 cents to get us all the way out to January 1st, we'd recommend going under storage or delayed pricing. If he isn't able to go ahead and go the storage or delayed pricing route because those rates are too high, then we'd recommend some type of deferred pricing contract where he can get the price set and then he still gets a chance to get a better price later if the prices go higher. He picks a price or a reference point somewhere out in May or July. Those futures prices go up, he still gets a higher price. The last thing we'd look at would be a basis contract. Now, the nice part about either the basis or the extended price contract is that does allow him to get an advance, so he has some additional cash to use. If he's got bushels that are on the farm, I would say that are unsold, I would say just go ahead and wait. We look for better prices on the future side, on the cash side, and also a narrowing basis further down the road.
Gotcha. And before we wrap up, talk about some of the latest things you have going on with Heartland Farm Partners right now. You know, one of the things we're starting to do more is we're looking ahead to next year. We think the marketing decisions are going to have to probably be made a little bit sooner this next year than they maybe have been in some other years, and some of this gets to be because of the positiveness of having those additional or less bean acres come in might mean there could be quite a few more corn acres. The other thing we're starting to do is trying to put out some of our more of our information on Twitter. And so I try to put out more at Jeff Peterson 01. So that's something as we try to get more information out to everybody. So that's a couple things we're working on right now, Troy. Next week, we'll be joined by Dr. Darrell Peel. He's an agricultural economist from Oklahoma State University. We'll check out the livestock market. So if you have a question that you'd like for me to ask him, email us or get in touch on social media, and I'll pass your question along. With harvest in full swing, many farmers are scratching their heads when it comes to what to do with corn that's been impacted by hail. But before you chalk it up as a loss, learn what your options are. Market Journal's Maddie McIntosh spoke with UNL Extension Beef System Specialist Dr. Mary Drewnoski and has this story.
Strong storms have the potential to turn a farmer's thriving cornfield into a nightmare. Heavy rain can flood a field, and fierce winds can break a healthy stalk in half. In the Midwest, it's common for storms to bring hail, too. And that's exactly what happened this year.
Actually, across the state, we had quite a few hail events. A lot of them were late season. In the central part of the state, there was a good swath that pretty much got hailed across the majority of the corn crop. So it was pretty bad for a year. I would say this is a pretty bad one.
Hail can be difficult for farmers to prepare for, but depending on when it hits, it's possible the crop may not be a total loss.
One of the things to consider if you have hail damage is where in the corn's life you have hail damage. This late season stuff, which is what we had a lot that was hailed in early August or very late July. It was already almost fully mature. The problem really comes down to the fact that once you get that hail that hits that corn, it actually creates the ability for the mold to start growing and the fungus to start growing, and so we can have mycotoxins.
That will reduce the corn's feed quality and make it worthless. Drewnoski recommends turning it into silage.
And the nice thing is, the earlier you get it off, the less chance for mold growth, the more starch you capture, the better the feeding value. The key is that a lot of people this year started harvesting too early for corn silage because it looked brown. What things had got killed in terms of the leaves and some of the top part of the plant started looking brown. They go, oh, it's really, really low moisture. I got a lot of analysis back that were in the upper 70s and even 80s for dry matter. We really want to shoot for about 60.
If mold is appearing from the hail damage, you should get a sample tested. Some types of mold aren't harmful to cattle.
A lot of the mold that we see is actually called diplodia. It's actually the stock rot fungus, and it does not produce a mycotoxin. The mycotoxins are the issue with cattle feed. So as long as it's just diplodia and it's not fusarium, we're fine. So it's that white mold. You can actually send it in to get it identified, and that's the first step in my opinion.
Dr. Drewnoski warns that hail can also cause a problem for the soil beneath the corn.
Probably the biggest concern, in my opinion, that would be something people might not think about is that we are letting the light get to the soil sooner, and that does have repercussions in terms of weed management and deciding whether or not I need to spray when I normally wouldn't have this fall, or do something like cover crops to suppress the weeds. Maybe the added benefit is I have the potential to get enough light in to get something established to produce some forage this fall. And some people did take advantage of that. It should help decrease the weed load next season, and so it could be a win-win.
Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Maddie McIntosh.
You're also advised to call your insurance agent if you've experienced hail damage. They'll be able to help you out too. The pests don't stop just because it's harvest time, and as its name would tell you, the wheat stem sawfly can be a real pain in the neck for wheat farmers. Surveys earlier in the year even indicated an increase when compared to recent years. I sat down with UNL Extension entomologist Dr. Jeff Bradshaw to learn more about the insect. So what is it, and what do wheat farmers need to know?
Yeah, so the wheat stem sawfly is a small wasp, and what it does is it lays its egg into the wheat tillers, and as the larva develops inside, it causes damage to the wheat. And ultimately what happens is that sawfly forms a pupa inside of the wheat stem toward the base. It girdles the wheat tiller, and so this girdling can cause lodging if the weather conditions are right.
And I know it's been an issue in Montana, North Dakota, Canada. So when did it make its way to Nebraska? Kind of what's the history behind it?
Yeah, so it's a native pest, and it was actually first identified, I think, in the 1800s from Colorado. But it has a wide distribution throughout the U.S. There have been collections as far south as Louisiana. And it's been a pest in spring wheat for quite some time. And at some point in the 80s, early 90s, it started developing sort of a timeline, some changes with that insect in its population allowed it to adapt to winter wheat. And ever since that adaptation to winter wheat has occurred, it seemed to have started moving south and east with more intense population pressure. And particularly for Nebraska, we've seen increases in numbers that started right around 2012.
And I think you touched on this a little bit, but kind of go into more detail about how attack the wheat, is that the right word? How it attacks the wheat, or if there's a better word?
Well, I mean, I guess if you're a wheat plant, you feel pretty attacked.
Yeah.
So the adult insect, the female sawfly, she has an ovipositor that she uses to lay eggs inside the wheat stem. So she'll actually inject her egg inside the wheat stem. When the larva hatches, it'll feed inside of that hollow wheat stem. And through that feeding, it can cause yield loss and can cause quality issues with the grain in that wheat head from that tiller. As it moves down, as it develops, it will begin to girdle that stem, usually around the week of harvest or close to harvest. And so as it girdles it, in order to overwinter near the base of that plant, it has to form a little pupal chamber. And in the process of doing that, cuts the wheat plant. And if your infestation is large enough tillers are cut, you can have fairly severe lodging in the wheat field. And obviously lodged wheat can be really difficult to harvest.
Yeah, and I know that it really impacts dry land wheat. And as far as irrigated wheat, that can be impacted too though, right?
Yeah, there's no reason it shouldn't infest or can't infest irrigated wheat. We typically see the problem more pronounced in dryland systems, and we think that's because of the abundance of conventional wheat fallow rotation we have in our dryland systems, where that wheat residue is so valuable for moisture retention in soil, but that wheat residue is also where that insect is overwintering. So that can serve as a pretty good source for wheat stem sawfly the next year. Whereas in our irrigated systems, we don't have so much that conventional wheat fallow system. We have more crop diversity and different kinds of crops that are grown in those systems that make it a less viable, agro-ecosystem for that insect to survive in.
And I know that there's some pest management strategies that you guys are working on. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, this is a really challenging insect to manage. We've looked at insecticides and both systemic and non-systemic insecticide options. And while some of our more conventional insecticides may work in that they, if you spray a wheat field that has sawflies in it, you will kill sawflies. But they emerge out of the wheat residue over about a 4 or 5 week period. So you get this constant influx of sawflies into your wheat field, and you can't afford in a system to spray weekly. That's really not an option.
Yeah, it's not feasible, sure.
And so, so what we've looked at, what seems to be the best strategy is resistant wheat. And so there are a small handful of wheats that are referred to as solid stem wheat. And so that's a wheat tiller that has a pith inside of it that's strongly expressed, so it's like a solid stem.
Right.
And what that does is the larva has a very difficult time developing and feeding inside of that solid stem material, whereas our conventional wheats are hollow stem, and it's easier for that larva to move inside of that stem. Okay. And so the challenge with those solid stem wheats is that the commercially available ones that we have right now were developed in Montana. So they're developed for that more northern high plains climate and less adapted for our wheat growing region and more southern wheat growing regions. So I know that our wheat breeders both in Colorado and Nebraska are working pretty hard to try to integrate those traits, those solid stem traits, into some of our more elite lines so that we've got something that can yield well and resist that insect in the future.
Jeff and I also spoke about grasshoppers and their impact on a wheat crop. Now to watch that, you'll have to head over to the Market Journal Facebook page. While you're there, give the page a like, and you'll get more access to exclusive web content. For a town of just over 10,000, Lexington has a busy airport. The Jim Kelly Field Airport sees about 20,000 takeoffs and landings each year. Many of them are single-engine aircraft flying in and out for agricultural purposes. About 30 of those 20,000 are to collect aerial imagery for Air Scout. They're an Indiana-based aerial imagery and precision ag service provider. Don Maston has been a pilot for 40 years and has been flying for Air Scout since 2013. And in the last several years, Air Scout has expanded its footprint in Nebraska. Read about Maston's experience and putting this aerial imagery to use in the October Nebraska Farmer. Running a farm is a full-time job times 10. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Never stops. As a result, relationships with those closest to you may suffer. While cutting out stress altogether is probably not an option, there are ways to reconnect with the ones you love. Market Journal's Brad Mills has the story.
Running a farm can be stressful. A combination of long hours, strenuous labor, and tough decisions can have an impact not only on a farmer's mind, but on their relationships as well.
We have families that are involved with work throughout the day, but yet we still have to stay connected with our family and balance that. There's pressures in the adults in the farm, keeping up with that work, but yet when they come home and connect with the family, maybe they're exhausted, but we still have our children to connect to and to touch base with every day, and I think that's important.
Compared to years past, modern farmers have more stressors in their lives than their predecessors.
There are so many things that are stressing families today that weren't maybe present in the past. And we've gone through those highs and lows in agriculture throughout history. But it seems like right now is a time that's critical in our community, and it may not show in their faces every day. We don't know their stories. But I think everyone just needs to pause and take care of how we are supporting one another.
While there may be many triggers for stress, Lynn says there is one thing that most farmers have in common.
Of course, it's finances. Farmers aren't out there on the top of the pyramid as far as salaries and income goes. And when that's stressing, of course, there's other things that trickle down within the family. Their family's under a lot of pressure right now, but still having to stay grounded with what's happening.
While avoiding stress altogether is impossible, there are things families can do to provide relief and strengthen their relationships with one another.
Really, it's what you enjoy doing together as a family. It can be those simple things, and we call it those magical moments. We all have them in our lives. We draw from them. It's little things that don't have to cost a lot of money. So whatever it is, whatever's special to that family, but holding those special and being true to that, and putting that in the forefront of what we're doing, being mindful, just pausing for just a second every day and saying, yes, this big picture is really stressing me out, but what can I do? What can I do maybe morning, noon, or night to take time with my family?
And if the stress becomes unmanageable, there are many resources and people available for farmers and their families to reach out to.
The main way to connect with us online is our website, child.unl.edu. And there are lots of resources for families and children, as well as educators of young children. So connect with your county extension offices, and they can put you in touch with us to get you the resources available. We'd love to visit with people about it when they're ready.
Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Brad Mills.
It's now time for weather with Nebraska Extension Ag Climatologist and Market Journal Chief Meteorologist Al Dutcher. Al, a little bit of something for everyone with this week's weather. It was warm, it was cold, there was rain, there was sun. Tell us what we have in store over the next several days.
Well, Toy, you're exactly correct. We have seen a roller coaster in temperatures. We've seen very cool temperatures with the extensive cloud cover in eastern Nebraska by midweek. The warm weather from western Nebraska moved in, only to be followed by a short cold front that brought successive winds to much of the eastern part of the state as the cold front itself moved through. We went right back into the freezer. Now we started to deal with some precipitation from that long wave trough in the western United States, and the first piece of energy ejecting out of that trough started to move across the state on Thursday, bringing some fairly moderate type of precipitation to much of north central and central Nebraska, and we started to see some of that fill into eastern Nebraska. And unfortunately, as we go through this next 7-day period, the vast majority of it is going to be confined to precipitation, and unfortunately excessive precipitation in some instances. So as we look at the upper air model, here is the upper air jet stream. Of course, bringing moisture up from the surface, and then we have this southwest flow, so that's warm air moving over the cool air, perfect overrunning situation. A series of low pressure systems moving around this upper air low. Each one of these pieces of energy will eject out, and the first one looks like it will eject out this afternoon, this evening, bringing heavy precipitation, most likely to southeastern Nebraska. And then as we go into Sunday, that big trough starts to move just a little bit closer to the east. Low pressure systems lined up at the surface to start ejecting toward the northeast. So we'll see the precipitation start to fill in as we go into the day, and that will move toward the north, bringing heavy precipitation to eastern Nebraska. And by the time we get to Monday, we see just a little bit slightly eastern movement of this trough. Low pressure situated over west central Kansas is really going to pump the moisture up into this region. We're looking at very heavy precipitation from Texas up to eastern Oklahoma, heavy precipitation in central Nebraska and eastern Nebraska, and then we start to see this trough starting to open up somewhat. As we get in the day on Tuesday, we still have the low pressure system down the Texas Panhandle. This looks to be the last big surge of moisture, very heavy precipitation likely across eastern Kansas all the way down through eastern Texas, and much less precipitation toward the north. And then that system, as it starts to lift northward, the low pressure system will remain down toward Texas. That will keep precipitation in play in this region. But more importantly, most of the heavier precipitation starts to move into the central Corn Belt with a little bit of residual moisture in the comma behind that front in the central Rockies Mountains. And then as we get in Thursday, that trough lifts a little farther toward the north. We got cool high pressure to our north. And so most of the precipitation will be in a boundary across the eastern United States. There is showing some sprinkles out in the central Rockies. I don't think this is going to be a major player. And then the overall upper air low itself starts to pivot up toward the western high plains as we go into the day on Friday. We do have cool high pressure in place, may get a little bit of an overrunning situation developing, and that brings that moisture up into southern Nebraska and points to the east. The good news is, as we look out even farther, even though we see this cold air in place, it's really on the first part of this forecast from next Thursday to the following Tuesday where the cold air plays into the northern Rockies. And in terms of precipitation, really it looks like the models are coming around to moving this out much quicker. I don't think that we're going to see the excessive moisture, at least in the western half of the Corn Belt, as it looks like a drier trend may actually start to establish itself. So Troy, overall, a very wet few days ahead of us before we see a drying trend developing at the end of next week.
Thanks, Al. All of today's stories are available individually on the Market Journal website and through the Market Journal mobile app. And keep up to date with the latest in agricultural news by following us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. That's going to do it for this week. I'm Troy Moling. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.